Okay, everybody, welcome. My name is Diego Mello with StratiVentures, and we are going to be talking about property management matters. The webinar starts right now at 6:30, and we're going to have our topic information beginning right at 6:35, and then our speaker's presentation, if it goes all the way through around 7:10 or so, we open it up for questions, because Q&A is really why we do what we do. In your Zoom window down at the bottom, there's the Q&A section. If we can, please get all your questions into the Zoom box in the Q&A part. Well, I don't think we have polls, but also the chat. If you have chat and you wanted to talk directly to our moderators, I believe we have Oriana and Enid from StratiVentures there to answer your questions. But questions to the speaker or myself, let's keep those in the Q&A. If you want to leave the webinar, feel free to hit the end button. But guys, this event is for you, so we encourage questions. A little bit about myself, so you guys get to know who I am. I was born in Colombia, South America, moved to the United States at the age of 4. I live in Houston with my wife, Kate, and now my son, who's a freshman at LSU. And prior, Texas mortgage broker and asset manager. I began investing in 2012 in real estate, and that same year founded my company, StratiVentures, and in 2014 we created the platform that is today StratiVentures, and in 2020 we launched our national presence, and that number, I think we've hit over 2,000 members nationally in now 24 states, guys. So we invite everybody to get to know who we are. And what is SVI? We're a full service real estate investing company with 4 primary departments, which is acquisition analysis, real estate services, project management services and contracting, and funding. Every single one of the members of SVI has to go through these 4 vetting process in order to build a solid company and team for them. And that's why we're there to help them have the right vendor and the right person to help them grow their business as an investor. You'll get to know the SVI team here. This is everybody that you see here. You're more than welcome to email them at their name at SVI, or for example, Enid at StratiVentures.com, and get to find out who they are, what they do, how they can help you. But also, if you have any questions, please feel free to email us at info@StratiVentures.com. One thing I always, Troy, like to make sure everybody understands is that the way we look at real estate is not like every other company. We only work with the mindset of an investor. So we make sure that everybody understands what we believe and what we focus on as the mindset of an investor at SVI. Is I always ask people, Troy, what does a real estate investor do? And you'll get 30 different answers. To me, that's why real estate investing is so volatile, is because it's the same practice, but 30 different interpretations of knowledge, 30 different values, 30 different needs and wants, 30 different levels of risk. So at SVI, we say that the real estate investor is an investor that analyzes, acts, invests, profits with one word in mind, and that's risk. So with that in mind, think about if you're analyzing your own transactions, pulling comps, market data, and you've never done that, that's high risk. If you start acting on it, like quoting repairs, material, labor costs, mechanical, electrical, plumbing factors, and you've never done that, that's high risk. So what kind of investing are you going to do? High risk investing. And what kind of profits are you going to get? 0. So that's why we want to be the risk mitigation partner to help you make sure that all the risk is coming from the corresponding correct vendor, which in turn you get to make a decision and assess the risk that you want to go into. So that's the identity of the SVI member. And today's key points with Troy, we're going to be talking about understanding contracts, clarifying your needs in a property manager, what is fine writing, explanation of the new flood addendum, understanding your roles. Am I correct, Troy? That we'll be covering these points?
Yes.
Excellent.
Maybe not exactly in that order, but we're going to touch upon all those items.
Awesome. And there's Troy there with his company, RPM Avitus. And we've hit right now the time that we can get your presentation started. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the share, Troy, and everybody that's joining us, welcome. Remember that we do, go ahead, Troy, and remember that we do encourage questions, so feel free to ask those questions.
Okay. Can you hear me okay, Diego?
Yes, sir, I can.
And are you seeing my presentation?
It says it's starting to share screen, and there we go. Yep.
Okay. Well, welcome. My name is Troy Espenlaub. I'm with Real Property Management Avitus. We are all independently owned and operated. So I say that the name Real Property Management is important, but the name Avitus is even more so because we all do things a little bit differently. And want to thank Diego for giving me the opportunity to speak. And, you know, he's exactly right. It's all about risk. And I think that's one of the reasons why I kind of hit it off well with StratiVentures is there's a really good understanding of risk in the way that, you know, if you do things right, you can lessen risk. I always say that I can't promise outcomes, but I can sometimes have some control over those outcomes in my part of the real estate business. And I know that Diego and the people on his team kind of feel the same way, because ultimately, if, you know, you're not picking the right deals and you're not getting all the way to the right things in that part of the process, once you get to what we're doing, you know, we could have the perfect tenants and have, you know, really great things happen and get it leased really fast. But if there's problems with, you know, maintenance and you made proper problems with the funding and you made some wrong choices along the way, we're not going to be able to manage our way out of that. So I the introduction, Diego. Let me go on to my next, basically the agenda, kind of similar to Diego's. We're going to go through a lot of information this evening. And really what my goal is here is not so much to talk about what I do. I'm trying to take the basic Texas listing and management agreement and take you through it really high level. So whenever you're looking for a manager, especially here in Texas, you're going to understand the agreement that we use most often. But even if you're not using that same agreement, it's a really good agreement because it covers a lot of things. So you can still get something out of this by, you know, grabbing these things. And when if you get a different document, say, hey, why is this not covered? Or how is this approached? So I think that's all gonna be helpful. A little bit about myself. I am an accountant by trade. I do keep my license, even though I no longer practice. I have a finance background. I worked in oil and gas for a while. I've owned my own business before this one also, and currently a licensed realtor. I don't buy or sell homes. We just work on rental property listing and management. So there's really two documents that I really have to know well, and that's the management agreement and the lease. And even in tonight doing this, I'm able to kind of, you know, catch up on some things that had been a while since I've looked at it. So this is really important tonight. It's we're going to be looking at a contract. And one of the first things I tell realtors is you cannot practice law. You cannot give legal advice. And you'll kind of see some of that when we go over some of the items in the presentation tonight. So basically what I'm doing is giving you the basics of what's in the agreement. We're going to use a lot of direct language from there. I'm not interpreting law. I can't comment on individual instances if they come up in the Q&A as to what happens with, you know, I signed this agreement and that happened. I would just tell you that the agreements are great, but nothing beats using an attorney if you feel like you need to use an attorney. You know, I think that's one of the major things that some people worry about. They don't want to spend the money to do that. And there's times when that's quite important. So this evening's objectives. I think before we talk about what's in a contract, we have to kind of understand kind of basically the roles and responsibilities of what a property manager should do and what a owner should do, because it's a relationship and everybody has a certain level of responsibility. And that's really what the contract is going to do. It's going to define the fine points of those things. But I think sometimes you'll find that there's no such thing as a perfect contract. And there's going to be some things that may not be in every contract. So it's always like a big picture. What are we trying to accomplish? And I'm not going to spend too much time on that because I know we've done presentations about that before. But I just want to fly through that real quick before we start getting into the actual contracts, which I think will take a majority of our time. What should I expect a property manager to do? and we're going to use PM from now on for property manager because I had to try to fit that in the slides, and it just makes things easier for me. So another thing is you're going to see the word broker a lot in the management agreement. And the reason that is everybody that's a property manager here in Texas is supposed to be either a broker or a sales agent. A sales agent has a license to practice real estate. They have not yet attained a broker's license. That usually takes 5 years and some other credentials. So our licenses are always held by a broker until that point happens. So in the contract, it refers to broker, but at the bottom, there's a part where we sign as representatives of the broker, basically. So just if you see that language in any of these things, just know we're using them. They're going to be interchangeable. So when I look at the common property management job, whenever I try to sell property management or have questions about property management, I always break it into really two pieces. Obviously, you're going to have someone that's going to fill a lot of, if you don't already have a tenant, you're going to have someone that's going to list the property and get someone in there. And then the second piece is once they're there, you're going to have to manage. And so we always start off with, well, what do we do if we're doing the leasing part of it? And, you know, one of the most important things is if we're seeing any kind of property code issues. These are going to be mostly locks, windows, and fire alarms here in Texas. Those are the big ones. You know, if your property manager should probably be walking your property and looking at a few of these things and saying, hey, you know, we need to make a few adjustments here. Luckily, Texas is not too stringent on that, but it's something you want to get right in the beginning. Rental property market estimate. Ultimately, the owner drives the listing price. We just provide input, but I think it's something that should be done. You should know what's going on in your market. You're going to see when we get into the contract, the part about collecting, retaining, and administering security deposits. That's a big deal. It's very heavily regulated, especially if you're a real estate agent. Condition of the property. That's something that we're not going to see a lot of in these contracts, and we're going to come back to that here in the beginning. And then obviously we want to collect the first month's rent payment. So in a linear fashion, we're going from listing, advertising, screening, basically to getting a tenant in there and handing over the keys. Common management responsibilities, the most obvious that everybody sees is we collect rent, we distribute it to the owners in a timely fashion. Ultimately, that's what you want. You need to get paid on time. If you have a mortgage or not, you still want to get paid. You know, we need to provide financial statements. Those will vary in degree of detail. Some of that will depend on the client. And also you'll need a Form 1099 at the end of the year. I mean, you're going to have to file your taxes. You need us to do that. Those are very basic things. Additional things that we do is we follow up on late rent payments, HOA complaints, lease violations. Basically, we're handling tenant matters. We're responding to the tenant requests, including maintenance, while keeping owners informed. And that communication is also a really key part of this. But ultimately, we're also managing not just the property, but the tenant. If we have good tenants, we want them to re-sign. That avoids the listing and the expense for the owners. And so that's really an important part of the job. We need to verify the physical condition of the property. You could have great tenants that pay on time, go in there and it happens. It's a mess. And that's personally why I won't manage a property that I don't see at least every 6 months. We're also required to send out notices. And this is important too. If you don't want your tenant rolling on to a month-to-month have plans for that property, that tenant needs to be notified. That manager needs to speak with you, and then that official paperwork needs to go out. And then finally, when that tenant does move out, that they've left it in good condition. We're putting the security deposit back to them if it's warranted. And also we're getting the property ready to list again, should the owner choose to do so. And those are all really common responsibilities. Most of these will be defined in the contract. So what are the responsibilities of the owner? Well, I think really first and foremost, the owner's job is to provide a safe and habitable home that meets property code requirements prior to listing. And it's always easier to do this. You know, if you ask questions, ask your property manager. They should be asking you what kind of locks you have. Do all the window latches work? Have you tested the smoke alarms? Those are things that you want to get out of the way beforehand. You know, your job is you're going to see something that it's going to sound a little different when we get to the contract, but in my belief, definitely it's your job to decide on the listing price. the lease term and the other provisions of the lease. Are you going to take pets or not? Now, I think that the property manager can advise. He's, he or she's got a lot of experience, but ultimately your risk profile, going back to what Diego talks about risk, is different for everybody. And I think the manager has to give, good advice, but ultimately respect where that owner wants to go with that. You need to at least have a basic understanding of the criteria your property manager's using. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to go through the applications and choose. I stay far away from that for several reasons. Number one, I don't want to get in trouble with fair housing. And the other reason is I don't want to bring liability to the owner. That's why you're hiring a property manager. But what we do is we tell you, this is what we're screening on. These are the credit. This is the things that we're doing. How do you feel about it? And we can adjust that scale to the needs of the owner. We just can't add anything that's not related, that might run afoul of fair housing. So it's a big deal, not just for the property manager, but also for the owner. We're going to maintain necessary maintenance funds, or they need to be able to provide funds for us to do what we need to do as far as, getting the property in good shape and keeping it in good shape. You need adequate insurance coverage. That's, for the benefit of the manager and the owner. And you need to make all your loan things on time. We don't want a house getting repossessed while there's a tenant in it. You don't want that, and neither does the property manager. So we are going to speak specifically about an agreement that most of us realtors use, and that is the Texas Realtors Residential Leasing and Property Management Agreement. So you're able to use that if your property manager is considered a realtor. Now there's the sales agent, that's more of a state licensing thing. I can have my real estate license here in Texas and not be a realtor. The realtor part is important. You do have to have a sales license or a broker license to be a realtor. But the realtor puts you on the MLS. It lets you do those sorts of things. And more importantly, it lets you use this form. And these forms are put together by real estate people and lawyers. And it's very much, there's a lot of fill in the blank to it. And I think the reason for that is obviously they don't want everybody out there drafting their own contracts. It's the same with the leases. If you have a contract that's going to cover almost everything, it's going to be fairly identical, and that it's going to be there's going to be a lot of benefits to using that contract, both for the property manager and for the owner, or in the case of the lease, for the tenant and for the property manager or owner. So this is the one we're going to talk about. And like I said, if you find most of the things that are in this one will apply to everything. I would just, caution you, if you're from out of state, everybody's laws in the states are different. So, there might be things in here that are completely irrelevant maybe to Louisiana. I think you'd still get some things in other states that are kind of guiding principles. So you'll still get something out of this, but just understand that when you get down to specifics, it all comes from state law, and every state is different about that. So some quick things to know about the agreement itself. The bare bones version of the agreement before you put on addenda or anything else, it's a 12-page agreement between the owner and broker, or as we said, we'd refer to as property manager. It is approved for use by Texas Realtor members. And what does that mean? Well, this is one of those things where if you have to ask an attorney that, they'll probably give you an answer based on experience. All I know is in the agreement, it does say something in the back about how and I want to get the thing here, it just says copyright. It says if an active realtor member of Texas Realtors does not negotiate this agreement as a party, or for one of the parties with or without the assistance of an active member of the State Bar of Texas, this agreement is voidable at will by owner. So obviously if an attorney's using it, attorneys have a lot of leeway, they can do what they want, but it's basically saying that the owner can void the agreement if it's not attached somehow to a lawyer or to a realtor who's an active member. That's just the fine print. Whether it's still going to be okay in court or not, I don't go there. Some people are trying to use it even though they're not realtors. I don't have the experience as far as being in court to know how that turns out, but that's just the fine print on the actual document. Another thing about it is it really just pertains to one property, and it's going to give you basically the address, and it's going to want the legal description, lot, block number, section, all that sort of thing. And we'll get to how, that can be brought in, how other properties can be brought in later, but that is one aspect of the agreement. It's going to define the term of the agreement. Those are the dates, the dates that, how long it's going to last, and whether there's automatic renewal and what you need to do if you don't want to be put under that 30-day automatically renewal. It's going to establish PM authority, and I use that word authority because that's what they use in the document, and responsibilities for leasing and management. If you are just listing a property with a realtor for rent and they're not going to manage, there's a separate document very much like this one, but it's just a leasing agreement. It cuts out all that management stuff. And if you're going to self-manage, I recommend obviously that you use that agreement. Unfortunately, I've come into some situations where a place has already had a tenant and I went to look for just the management agreement from Texas Realtors, and that does not exist. I'm sure they have a good reason for that, but just something to be aware of that, whenever you're going into this, it's a leasing and management agreement. It's going to outline the owner's reputation or representations, indemnifications, and it's going to have certain things that they're going to have to cooperate on. It's going to outline your fees, your reserve requirements, your insurance requirements, and a lot of that's going to be fill in the blank format. So you're going to have verbiage, but the amount of the insurance, the amount of the fees, that's all something that you negotiate and put in. And it's also going to have a paragraph 20 is called the special provision section. And as realtors, we're told just basically never to touch that. But it seems like there's some areas in here where it says the owner can put some stuff in. Basically, they're just being real careful about practice of law. So they don't want somebody who's a realtor and not trained in the legal aspects of this to get in there and just start writing law. I do have addenda outside of the normal addenda in my agreement. All of it went through a Texas real estate attorney. It came from our home office, which was in Salt Lake City, Utah, different state. I had it reviewed for Texas compliance, and we include a lot of that, but I didn't just go and put it in myself or do anything like that. But that's just a really a good paragraph to know is paragraph 20. So what is the PM authority included in the Texas Realtors Agreement? And I call this the broker may exercise items, because if you ever want to copy this, just Google it, because you can find one. They're out there. It says broker may exercise these items. So it's not saying must. Once again, not a lawyer. I'm just taking the verbiage there, may. It's going to authorize common listing practices, just like it would in the leasing agreement, the standalone that doesn't have the management, as far as putting your signs out there, your lock boxes, your MLS posting, realtor access to the property, our responsibility to screen the tenant. And most of that stuff's pretty common stuff. Some of the other language in there gets to be a little more, basically it's giving the property manager a lot of rights, in my opinion. But I think if you have issues with this, this is all about communication. It's going to talk about negotiating and executing leases on the owner's behalf for the properties for rates and on competitively reasonable terms. So basically, I'm going to read that off of here because my slide's a little bit, I have my screen there. So, okay, so here it is. It's going to talk about advertise the properties for lease at methods that broker determines are reasonably competitive, including limited, but not limited to creating and placing advertisements. But it's basically giving you the right, the owner or the property manager, broker, the right to basically negotiate and execute leases on the owner's behalf for the property at market rates. You notice it says at market rates. It doesn't have somewhere in here where it looks like you're filling in the amount. It does say that, in accordance with paragraph 20 at the end. So maybe you put that in paragraph 20. My point is, when you're doing these things, you want to be very upfront about what you want, and you want to communicate well with your property manager, because that's what this is for. You don't know your property manager in the beginning; they don't know you. You'll establish some trust. You'll always fall back on this. But basically, it's saying for reasonable terms, and this is where the owner gets to put in how long they want the lease to be. Not less than 12 months is normally what I put, and not more than 36 months in according with the instructions in paragraph 20. Or paragraph 20 is the part where special provisions, you put what you want in there, so to speak. So basically what you're doing there is you're setting the tone or the time of the lease that you want the property manager to negotiate. Market rates, that's a little more, hey, it sounds to me like, kind of what the property manager says. So make sure you're having these discussions. I can tell you when I do this, the owner tells me what they want. We report every couple. If we think that we ought to go up or down in price, we make that suggestion, but the owner drives that. Some other things in here too, it talks about terminating leases, negotiating lease terminations, and servicing notices of termination. Once again, this is something I think that should be communicated with. If your property manager's communicating well, then that's something I think the owner should make that decision. But basically, it's granting a lot of authority here to the property manager. It talks about negotiating and making reasonable concessions to tenants or former tenants in the property. Not a lot of detail on what that is. But basically, it's giving the property manager a lot of leeway. Now, what I do is I have a separate addendum in my agreement that lists some more fine print and some items so that there's no misunderstanding. But if you're signing this basic agreement, then just make sure you're talking about those items. And that's why it's important to read your agreement. Some more things. Actions to evict, recover possession, recover lost damages. Now remember, this is the may section. It says he may do that. And we'll get to the end here is where, what's the cost for that? Where do we go as to if that happens? Because sometimes property managers will do eviction, sometimes they'll have someone else do it. Here's another big one that you need to know. Collect administrative charges, including, basically the any kind of late fees, checks from the tenants, return check fees. And we're going to get to a part about the contract later that I think is going to surprise some of you, but I want you to understand it, and we'll hit that one when we get to it. Here's the big one here too. Hire contractors to repair, maintain, redecorate, or alter the property. And basically the brokers give a limit on what they can do on their own without talking to the broker or property manager. So on that, you need to basically just, that's where you specify in there, hey, $500, no more than that, $200, $300. It's whatever you want it to be. So as the consumer there, make sure you're putting that in there. Another part though is basically without owner consent, hire contractors to make emergency repairs to the property without regard to expense limitation that broker determines are necessary to protect the property or health or safety of an ordinary tenant. So that's, that's basically saying if you have a major emergency, then your property manager can expend what they think they need. Ultimately, you would want to have good communication. That would be something you would want to discuss. And you have to remember, we're going to talk about reserves here in a little bit. It's going to be tough for a property manager to expend a lot of money on your behalf necessarily, but these are just things that you need to have conversations about, and why communication is very important, and why that property manager should be able to get a hold of you in case something happens, whether it's by email, text, or some other form. These are the must-dos. I call them that because it basically says that in the agreement. It's saying that we're required to maintain records related to the property and retain those records for 4 years. We basically must file the IRS forms for what that you get, or for the amounts that you get per year, the gross amount. That's basically us telling the IRS you had this much gross income, and you'll want that 1099 from us too, because you'll need it when you file your taxes. You have to provide monthly statements. Basically, you're accounting for where's the money going. You're going to have some offsetting, you're going to net some fees and things like that. But at the very least, when you get a net amount of money, you need to be able to work back to that gross amount. So that's accounting for what we're doing. Security deposits are a tricky situation. For those, we have to keep those in a separate trust account. We have to give an accounting of those to the person when they move out as to what they get and what they don't get. So security deposits, if you're holding them on your own and your property manager's not, then that property manager may still has to maybe disclose that, does have to disclose it to the tenants, but you may want to make sure your property manager's holding those. That's probably the best way to do it. Things that we cannot do: we cannot file a loss with your insurance carrier. We can assist you on insurance matters, but I can't just go up and file. If Diego's my client and he has a house, I can't just go file on his insurance. This gets back to that deal about realtors and lawyers. May not directly or indirectly employ or pay a lawyer to represent owner. So that means if things get into some kind of legal situation, and I always tell my clients this too, that I'm representing you as a property manager, but if you ever feel that you need to hire a lawyer because of something going on with the tenant or anything else, understand that you need to hire your own counsel and do it that way. And that's an important part of here. And actually, I'd kind of forgotten about that. Luckily, it hasn't come up lately, but it was good that we read that I read that today. But I see the reasoning for it. So just always make sure that you're legally protected. Common owner responsibilities in the agreement. So basically, what does your property manager want to make sure of? They do not want to rent a property that you don't really own or that you don't have all the rights to, because they don't want someone coming in and they have an agreement with a tenant and it opens us to liability if you never really owned the property completely, or there were liens or issues or that sort of thing. This isn't going to be some kind of full-on title search. I pull an original title. I make sure that, the owners are going to represent that they own it, and that covers us. But those are important things. And to kind of back up on the meaning of that word representation, that basically means I am saying to you that to my knowledge, this, that, and whatever. So if I sold Diego my car, I could tell him I have no knowledge of it ever being in a wreck except the first year that I got it when it got rear-ended on the highway. So I made a representation of, the best of my knowledge, basically. And these representations are in there because that's something we need as the property managers, because we're not able to go back and research all of these things. We're kind of having to take the owner's word for it, and it's information that we need to have. We go back another representation. So you have the financial representations, the ownership, that sort of thing, the health and safety stuff. That's important too. We don't live in that house. Is the owner aware of anything that could harm somebody? Do we have issues with mold? Do we have issues with mildew? That's stuff that we're kind of having to rely on the owner for. Another thing that they specifically put in there too is a lot about whether pool gates and fences and things like that are they're compliant with local ordinances. And I think you don't have to go too far to think where this comes from is, kids getting in pool areas and safety, things like that. So in the agreement, we want to make sure that we're okay on that. Also, the lead-based paint notice. This is something basically for any home 1978 or earlier. It's one of the addenda that we'll talk about, but it's basically just saying, yes, this home was built between 1978 or before 1978. We take that addendum and we pass it on to the tenants along with a brochure about lead, because basically, we're disclosing that fact. We want to make sure that they're aware of it. Additional owner responsibilities. So the owner is asked to cooperate with the property manager, and this is basically one of the things that's specifically put in there is refraining from negotiating directly with tenants. This is both for liability reasons, and it just, it makes your property manager's life harder. That's the point of having the property manager, is letting them handle that work. You also have the responsibility if all of a sudden you're doing anything that's going to put control of that property at risk. And you know the basics of these if you're in real estate. If you're late on your loan payment, your HOA payment, your property taxes, we're starting to talk about getting down that road towards possession and liens and things like that. So if any of those things are happening, and I've had clients where that's happened before. It didn't get really far down the line, but they said, okay, well, I'm in forbearance. Here's my plan. And we kind of just, have that discussion, because ultimately, what happens if that tenant's in there and, it's bankruptcy, it can become a really big mess. Insurance on the property, there's actually something in the agreement that talks about that. And that's one of those fill in the blank things where it's basically saying that you're going to list me, the property manager, as co-insured, and the property manager gets to put on there how much they want for the coverage. And that's a fill in the blank thing. You're going to need a landlord policy no matter what, whether you have a property manager or not. You're not using the same policy you used when you own the home. So really the part there is that's, even if you're not using a property manager, you need to be doing that anyways. I think the part is how much coverage do you really need? And that's a conversation you should have with your with your insurance agent, probably before you list your property for rent. Owner will advance PM funds as necessary. So this is where we get back to talking about, emergencies happen. And, if we have to do things to make sure people are safe and compliant and we need money quickly, obviously we have reserves for that, but that's kind of a balance too, if we know we can get money fairly easily, then we may not go as heavy on the reserves, but it is a responsibility because we don't make loans and we don't fund what we need to do for the property. We're managers, not people loaning money. Fees. This is everybody's favorite, I'm sure, because this is where I get the most questions normally when we send out an agreement. So there are going to be a lot of different parts in here. And this is probably, if you're getting a little sleepy, probably the time to wake up and maybe grab the pencil and jot some of these down, because I think it's not just the fees that are in here, it's kind of how they're presented. So the big one you're going to have first is basically the management fee. And that's going to have a little box there where you put in either the percentage, and a lot of times what they do is they'll put in a percentage and or a minimum. So, if you have a property that's, $1,100 a month property and your property manager usually gets 10%, they may put in 10%, but they're used to a 1,500 property, so they may put in a minimum of 150. So you got that percentage / minimum. They can put in a percentage without a minimum, percentage with a minimum, or there's also a spot for a flat fee at the bottom. And this is all fill in the blank stuff. So this is the stuff that you're going to negotiate. The listing fee, basically it can be a percentage of 1 month's rent. I noticed this today. I never really looked at it too hard, but a percentage of all the rents over the time of the lease. I can't say I've ever seen that one before, or basically a flat rate. Service fee. That's going to be, this is a big one here. This is kind of where you get into that maintenance question. Are you handling your own maintenance? Is the property manager doing your maintenance? If they are, this is basically going to say the percent that's the markup on it, or the amount. Almost most of the time it's going to be ready. And this is going to encompass things like make ready, maintenance, remodeling. So this is important stuff to pay attention to. I mean, if you're not using your property manager to do maintenance and you're doing it on your own, I'm guessing you're putting 0 on there. Or what I do is usually put or owner will take care of their own management. Administrative fees. Now this is where we get back to that part about collecting fees. It basically says in this agreement that any kind of late fees, any kind of fees for, checks being, return checks, all those things, those go to the property manager. That's not even something we have the option to change in there. I don't know. I think obviously that puts me in a good spot because we're collecting fees. I think when it comes to fees, I look at it and I say, well, if I'm going to do a fee, take a fee from somebody, it needs to be because I am taking an additional risk, putting in additional time, or using knowledge that I have that I've gained over the years. To me, a fee that doesn't encompass any of those 3 things is basically a junk fee. And we're going to get to an example of one of those, in my opinion, here in a second. This is my thinking, not legal advice or anything, but I also think that, if we're assessing the fee in a way, that takes some liability off the owner. They're not running around in there assessing fees on people. And there are limits to fees. I mean, there's limits to late fees. There's all sorts of, guidelines that you have to follow. So it's not like we're going to make a ton off fees, but just understand that so that question doesn't come up later, that's where those kind of fees are going. Insurance and legal fees. This is basically, in almost all cases, it's going to be a fill in the blank. It's going to be an hourly rate. This is if we get hauled into court based on something you did that has nothing to do with us and we have to testify, or if we have to show up and do, meet with insurance people and that becomes a really long thing that's not in the normal term of the agreement. This is basically a fee for that. If I have to meet an insurance adjuster in my business, it's an hour or 2. I don't really care. That's not a big deal to me. If I have to spend a day out there, then there needs to be some compensation for that. And I address that difference in one of my addendums that I have. Fees in the event of a sale. Remember when I said junk fee a second ago? This is a fee specified as due to the property manager if tenant that the PM finds buys the property, or if PM finds a buyer through means. Can be a flat fee or percentage, or you can just put 0 in there. And so what a lot of people will do is they'll put in a 1%, and the property manager basically finds the tenant under the auspices of finding a tenant to rent the place. They fall in love with the place. They want to stay there. Owner wants to do a deal with them. They want to sell. And then property manager, no matter what, picks up 1%. Well, I'm not a fan of that because I think we already got paid for that in the beginning when we got the lease fee, which was the first month's rent. So I will tell you, this is one that you really need to, and I've seen not just this in the Texas Realtors agreement, I've seen other places have their own agreement, and this always gets picked up in there. So be very careful when you look at that. Reserves, that's what we're holding for expenses. That's going to be a fill in the blank thing. I hold larger reserves for older properties and for properties that people are overseas, just because, you know, it's harder to get them to get me money. I don't like holding a lot because it's not something I need and I don't want to be responsible for it, but it's something that, you know, we need money. Once again, we're not the bank, so we need to have access to that. And the final fee, termination fee. And I know we're running a little bit late. I'm going to try to wrap it up in the next 5 minutes. But the agreement outlines the terms, including the automatic, basically the automatic extension part. And basically it says, unless either party provides a written notice of termination to the other party at least 30 days before the expiration date, remember that's the term that's going to be on there, this agreement will automatically extend on a monthly basis until either party terminates by providing at least 30 days written notice to the other party. So if you're getting rid of your property manager, you're writing this notice out, you're doing it on time, I'm guessing you're probably going to do like I do with my tenants when we're not renewing. You're probably sending it registered mail, email, carrier pigeon, whatever, documenting it, keeping it, and not forgetting that date. Here's another thing too. Basically, you know, it talks about the termination. It's talking about, and I'll let you read it right there. The broker determines that the broker cannot continue to represent that person. Basically, it gives the broker / property manager the ability to give 30 days notice and get out of the agreement. I've never done that, but it is there, so be aware of it. At the time this agreement ends, owner must pay broker the amount due under the agreement. And this is something that you really need to pay attention to because it came into play for me once when I took over a client from another person. It says, basically, if it's leased to a tenant on the date this agreement ends, and owner terminates this agreement, an amount equal to the greater of A, the management fee that would accrue over the remainder of the term of the lease. So let's stop and think about that for a minute. Person A rents a property, $1,000, your agreement date's up, you just relisted him as a leasee or you just found him. Basically, it's saying that 10% of that $1,000 for the next 8 months or whatever's left is due the property manager. So be very careful when you're signing that. I just put a basic small fee in mine under B or B. So I think on that one, I would probably circle or B. That way you're not locked into the property manager necessarily every time he extends a lease or finds a new person for you 2 months before the management agreement ends. Because you're talking about two agreements here. The lease agreement, that's what A talks about, and you're talking about B, you know, or the management agreement. So very important to make that distinction. I learned that when I took over another client from somebody. Real quick, common addenda to the realtor agreement. So we went through the 12 pages, and the 12 pages, they carry a lot of things too, but it's kind of like cafeteria a la carte. You can go to certain addenda that have also been put together for this, and some of them are quite useful, some of them may not apply. But they're incorporated in here. There's basically a box you can check when any of these have been added, and then they become part of this. And then there's a blank part where you can put in some more. But once again, if you're going to do something that's not on the list, something that's probably best vetted through an attorney. So information about brokerage services quickly, that is something that just says, hey, this is me, I'm the property manager. I'm an agent, I have a license, the broker holds my license. If you have any complaints or any issues, know that I'm represented, and here's how you can complain to my broker and the state and things of that nature. So it's really just a disclosure item. We talked about the lead-based paint addendum. That's also going to go to the tenants after you sign it, along with a pamphlet about lead-based paint. So when we talked about only having one property in this thing, the way it's set up, this is where the multi-property addendum comes in. So you like the work I'm doing, you want to add more properties to this same agreement. It's a quick one, I can't remember, I think it's 1 page. It's been a little while since I've done one. And we just basically say this property is now, everything in this agreement now applies to this property. If you like what your manager's doing, you like the agreement, that's fine to keep it that way. However, nothing says that you can't go on and get a different agreement And then you're not tied to these terms as far as the dates and things like that. So just be aware of that. And if that's something you want, make that request of your property manager. Owner's notice concerning condition. This is more than just representation. It's going to have some check boxes and things that probably helps the agent list a little better. Do you have a gas furnace or an electric furnace? It still has those "are you aware of" problem questions that are in the main agreement, but it's there. Authorization to act before an HOA, pretty self-explanatory. What am I using this for? My owners are out of state. The new tenants, they want pool tags. They show up with their lease and they want to be difficult about it. And they say, well, you're not the owner, but you do have a lease. And then another thing I have is I'm the property manager. I have this form. These are my tenants. Please not only give them the pool tags, but if there's any notices or violations that they're doing something wrong, send them also to my office. Rules and regulations of the owners association. This is for us if we can't get it on our own. If they're going to violate a rule, we need to make sure they know what the rules are. If you're not supposed to have a boat parked in the front yard, then let's by all means make sure that they get a copy of this and know they're not supposed to. It's kind of the same way with the bylaws and the deed restrictions. The Form W-9, this is where you give us your social security number, everything we need to file that 1099 and give it to you for taxes. But this is something I normally only do through DocuSign or something really secure. Unescorted access lets us go into the property. The conditions is, once again, we kind of talked about that. I picked that up twice accidentally. And then the assistant animals. So we cannot keep someone from having a pet if it's not really a pet, but an assistance animal or an emotional support animal. Well, that's regulated by the government. And this is just basically us saying that, hey, if we get that situation and you use us, we have to let that animal in, no extra deposit, no extra pet rent or anything like that. And then finally, I promised that I would talk about the new flood disclosure. And this is important, especially here in Houston. Basically, the legislature passed that requirement that really we need to disclose what we know about the property and then where it is in the floodplain. So starting January 1st, we started using this addenda, and it's not even in this agreement here. It's not even in the latest version I've seen, even in the check boxes that already have everything else. So we do write it in at the bottom, but we do use it. And it's basically going to ask the owner to their knowledge, basically, or to the best of their knowledge, are you in a 100-year floodplain or not? It's what's asking. And then it's going to ask if you flooded in the last 5 years. And so when I first got this, one of the questions I kind of had about it was, well, it says to your knowledge. How hard does that owner really have to look, or should they look if it's something obvious? So I asked my broker, because like I said, the broker always holds our license, and I took the class on the legal update, and I asked that gentleman the same question. I said, well, how do we respond to that? I mean, should we advise them maybe that, if they ask us, well, I don't know, should I go look? Should we tell them that might be a good idea? And both answers I got is it's always better to disclose than not to disclose. You definitely want to, and let's just be quite honest, I don't think that's going to put off a lot of people here in Houston, because, I mean, it's a 100-year floodplain. A lot of people are in a 100-year floodplain. And there's also some guidance on if you've elevated your home, you still have to make that disclosure. And from what I've read, that you do not. You're no longer, even though you're physically in the 100-year floodplain, you're above. So that's something that definitely a good attorney question, but I read that in that same article here. That's going to give an addition of the definition of the floodplain and flooding, but here's the important part. If you don't disclose it, the tenant may terminate the lease by giving written notice. If they've had a substantial loss, no later than 30 days after that loss. And that is if basically the property, the damage equals 50% or more of the personal property's market value when flooding occurred. But basically it's going to give them an out. And so I would definitely think that you would want to disclose this. If your property manager is not giving you this already, then it's something on any new extension of new leases. So let's say I have a lease and we're offering them an extension. We need to put it back in and do all that. I sent one of those to the owners that I work with earlier this week. Even though our agreement was 2 years old, it was something that I want to give to the new tenant, definitely. And just real quickly, items not specifically covered here. I mean, it says that we have the authority to do evictions. Reasonable cost doesn't say we must. Doesn't really cover, the time for that. That's kind of a big deal. Another thing too is I don't see anything in here at all I read about doing actual visits to the property. So we cover all those in the addenda that we do. We kind of have a schedule of service and fees, and we really outline all that, what we will or will not do. But just something to be aware of. And that's it. That's all I have. I apologize if I went really fast there, but we had a lot to cover, and
no worries.
Questions at any time.
No worries. Okay, let's go ahead and start the Q&A section here. So give me one quick moment. We do have questions. And give me a second, Troy, 1 second. All right. And I hope all that information, guys, was good. I can definitely say that's the reason why you go with a property management company and you don't go with a particular realtor that wants to take on a property management role, right? Because, they're out there. There's a major difference with that. If you want to get in contact with Troy, please feel free to reach out to him. There's the phone number to his company, his email address, and also the webpage in order for you to find out more about his webpage. Your webpage is very informative. I mean, I've gone through it. It's really good.
Well, I can't take any credit for that. It's one of the uniform things that we have across the franchise. We're all different except for the webpage, but I'll definitely pass those compliments on to the marketing guys.
Yep, they did really good. So let's start on some questions. We had two people ask the same questions, Ms. Carrie and Mr. Tony. It said, can you explain why we add the PM company as an additional insured?
So that is a good question. Basically, the quite honest answer is to lower the risk to the PM. The property manager is kind of taking on a risk. There's a lot of things that we can control, a lot of them we don't. When we talk about the representations, you're going to represent the best of your knowledge. Did you have a mold problem? Did this happen or that happen? And, we're kind of, like you said, we're lowering our risk on that too. As an aside to that has been harder to get in recent years. But I'll tell you this too, in my lease, I do the same thing though with the tenant. I require the tenant to get insurance and on the liability portion to name the owner. I try to get them to name me too. Very rarely can I get that anymore. That's fine. But I want that owner named as an additionally insured person on their liability too. And that really should not cost you anymore. It's going to be more just a question of, are they going to let you do it or not?
In this day and age where liability can come out of nowhere, it's better to have it than not, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Ms. Carolyn asked here, is it standard for a PM to have tenants change their air conditioning filters every month?
So there's two schools of thought on that. I know there's companies that make money off property managers, basically, where I don't do it this way, but there's companies that'll send them every month and then you pass the charge on to the owner and you rely on the tenant to do it. I'll tell you a story today. I went to a property to do my 30 or this one, we do a quarterly visit. And I went and, usually I'm the one doing it myself, but sometimes I'll have a tenant that'll grab it from me and while I'm doing stuff. And shame on me, the last time I visited this property in November, I handed her the filter and didn't do it myself. And today when I went in there, I looked at that filter. It was really dirty. I took mine out of the package, put it in there. And as I was walking away to my left, I saw the filter that I brought several months ago. So, on that, I would probably prefer someone to actually do it. But then again, it depends on your tenants. I have tenants too that they'll show me it's clean. They don't want me to do it. And that's just the kind of people they are. You'll get a good feel for that. But consistently, once a month to me seems a little bit much. I think even with the lower cost, you can get at least 3 months out of them. And if you're getting those big 4-inch ones, which ones I love the most, they're more expensive, but I think you can get about 6 months out of those. Yeah. So if you have those, I'd use those.
Great. And Ms. Carolyn also asked this question here. What about 50% of the monthly rent each time the same tenant renews the lease, just for the first month of the new lease? I've never heard of that before.
Well, and here's the thing with fees. And then I told you my thoughts on fees. Is it going to increase my risk, my work, that sort of thing? I can only tell you what I do. I do 1 month. And a lot of times these guys that are doing that are probably also only taking a half up front. I have a problem with that because if I'm going to put something on the MLS, I need to do what other agents do and take the full month and then offer half of that to another agent. In certain areas, almost everybody's going to use another agent. Some areas they're not. But if I go out there and just take from you, Diego, the half of 1 month, and then I put it out there, it's going to be on the market a while because number one, an agent's not going to bring there. But then what I'll do is then with these deals, what they're doing a lot of times is they'll say, well, okay, you only did half, but they'll try to recoup that money when they re-sign that same tenant. So now all of a sudden you're paying that other half over and over and over again. What I do is if I sign a tenant, you're paying the month, and we hope to re-sign them if they're good tenants. And we're going to give notice, and we're going to, if you want the lease done again and negotiate a change, we'll do that. And we're also going to put the addendum in, change the term, change the price, and we're not charging you anything for that. Now, if it were your tenant and I took over when we already had that situation, I'm going to charge you a couple $100 for my time to put together a new lease. But no, it doesn't surprise me that it's out there. But like I said, ultimately, these are things you want to know before you sign the agreement.
Okay, thanks for that answer. Chad Herman German asked, what if you have a tenant that has been for years? Is the flood addendum only for new leases? Why is there no, what if they're month to month?
So that is a good question that I only probably have half an answer to. There's a Texas Realtor article that came out, and if you Google Texas Realtor flood addendum, you'll probably get access to that article. They asked that very same question. And what it did say is it didn't put much of an emphasis on month to month. Of course, you could always do it. I always say it doesn't hurt, but it did advise on any kind of addendums or extensions of that lease. Excuse me, it said that we ought to be doing that. And so what I started doing on those is sending them back to the owner because I didn't have that in my original management agreement. And I'm saying, please sign this so I can include it with the lease for that tenant so that we're all covered.
Okay. Carrie Reed asked, are tenants required to have rental insurance there? Or if yes, should it also include coverage for floods?
Good question. Flood is not normally included in a basic renter's policy. So you may or may not already know that. So flood. So let's talk about why we're really doing that. So if your tenant loses all their belongings, they're probably not going to be able to pay the rent if they're having to buy clothes and things like that. So the contents is very important, that piece. And then the liability piece is just in case you get someone in there acting careless and they want to get together and sue you for it, they need to carry some liability too. So I would almost always require them to do it, give us a certificate. And if you put someone in as an additionally insured party, which is what you want the owner to be with the tenants, if I can't get additionally insured, I just want to be additional interest. And that means I'll at least get something in the mail if they end up paying late or that coverage lapses. So yes, there's a spot for that in the lease. And I would encourage you to have that. If you have a property manager and it's not in there, ask the question and see where you are with that.
Okay, thanks for that answer. Chris asked, what is an average fee that is charged for property management?
So that's a tough question to ask because it's really a situation to where, and this is not me putting on my salesman hat, it's just saying what it is. It's what you're paying for. If all you're getting is rent collection, I think that should be probably a fairly low flat fee. Remember that realtor or that property manager, that's his or her choice to provide that, call themselves the property manager and still just take that fee for doing nothing. In my opinion, they're bringing their risk level up because they're not out at the property, but they're also not doing a ton of work and they're not, I say basically that there's no average. I would use what you want and shop. I think anything over 10 is getting pretty high. I think anything around 8 is still okay. That's why I have anywhere from 9 to 10, but I'm going to go out to the property at least every 3 months or once every 6. So it's all about what you're willing to pay for. And I would just say if all you need is rent collection, you've known that person forever, you have no real fears and they're there and there's no issues, that's a unicorn situation. But I guess you could just use Venmo for something like that. It's all about, like you said, the risk and where you're at.
All right, we have these are 3 questions by the same gentleman, or it's Aslam Khan asked, do you as an owner have the right to visit the property?
If you look, that's more of a question about the lease. And legally, I would tell you to refer to whatever lease that you signed. The Texas Realtors lease usually gives you the ability to do that. With some stipulations now, we're in a COVID time. So even though you have the right to do something, you may want to understand and be careful, how you exercise that in this environment. Basically, it's the understanding that they do. Now, I will tell you this: do I let owners that I'm representing, come to the property with me and do that? I don't. I am definitely on giving them photos, giving them reports. The only time I make an exception to that is if the owner actually handles their own maintenance and they don't even know that's the owner. Then there's no way I can really avoid that, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. They're there to do a job. I understand that.
Right.
But if you have questions about your rights, definitely go to your lease. Read the lease like the management agreement. Find that part in there if you have questions. Definitely a real estate attorney or possibly the realtor representing you can help you with that.
Yep. And guys, those of you that are planning on calling Troy, I can tell you that the way he puts things together and the professionalism of his company for the reports, for the pictures, what that is there is to minimize risk, and most of all is to also minimize your time having disputes. Because Troy is a very direct person, and one thing about him, he makes sure that there's no open items for interpretation, right? Because that is always a double-edged sword. So this goes to this question here is, if yes, about visiting the property, does the tenant have to be there when they visit the property, if that's in the lease, or what's your recommendation?
Oh, that's a tough question.
I knew it.
I will tell you what I do. This goes back, this isn't Texas specific. This is something we learned in Salt Lake City because we also did some training with the company on that. In my opinion, I think you almost always want to be there with the tenant for two reasons. Number one, you don't want them thinking that you're taking anything or doing anything or that sort of thing. Number one, you want to have that FaceTime with them, even if it's someone you may not like a lot. It's, hey, look at me. Here's my face. I'm out here. We're looking at things. And basically, you're going to have sometimes some questions for them. There's going to be things that maybe they didn't cause that damage. You know what some damage is, maybe with the roof, and you need a timeline to kind of make your decision. So I would say, in my opinion, I always say I would go definitely. And another thing I do too is they know it's in their lease that we're going to visit. We have certain addendum that we add to our lease too. But I tell them that when we're doing a showing, I'm like, if you take this property, these are the agreements, and we're going to come out every 3 months. I'm going to let you know a couple of weeks in advance. I don't pull this. One thing I'm a big stickler about is, hey, I'm coming out tomorrow. I wouldn't want someone to do that to me. I'm not a fan of that. So we give at least a week and a half notice. And once we have that relationship, we understand that, hey, they're not just putting us off. So we got to do what we got to do. It may end up being a week later. Sometimes it comes a week earlier, but we at least make sure we're being respectful, but we're also not backing off our right to do what we need to do.
Okay. And Eston Rogers asked, he actually has a couple questions that flow here is, what question do you wish an investor would ask you before having your company property manage their property?
That's a good question. I would say really, what's the long-term goal? And that sounds kind of touchy-feely, but what do you want out of the situation, not specifically the owner? And my answer to that would be is we want to find good tenants. And as long as you want to be an owner investor, we want to keep those tenants happy while being realistic on pricing as far as, we're not just giving away the store on what we're doing in there. But we want to be fair and keep a good market rate. And hopefully we want to keep those tenants. And then, it's kind of like when you have a happy owner and the happy tenants and everybody gets along well, it makes life real easy for us. And it brings down that risk because guess what? We're not listing again. When we list, we're getting the money. That's great. But ultimately, as a manager, I'm also taking the risk on of, okay, now I'm going to go out there and meet a stranger. I'm going to do all the really good screening, but I don't know what I'm going to get for certain. You never can be for real. So I think the question you ask is just what is your long-term goal? And if you want to sell in a year, that's fine. No hard feelings there, but just kind of, share that information. That's my advice.
And Troy, that's one of the reasons why you're one of the SVI member vendors, is because our members are trained to ask that question for longevity. Is you're going to be there for the marathon. You want to know that person's going to be there for the marathon with you. So Eston's one of our members, and I know him. He asks those kind of questions. So I'm really glad he positioned that there. Yeah. He also asked, what have you learned from being a property manager you wish you've learned at the beginning of your property management career?
I think everything is really, and I'm going to sound weird when I say this, but maybe not. Everything just seems to kind of So I'm an auditor by trade. That's what I started off doing as a CPA. And you learn all these things about like sampling and statistics and things like that. And, when you have a few properties, you can talk in theory, but as you get more experience, you start to see the things that are going wrong. And where this really shows up a lot is plumbing, of all things. I get people that have an old home and we have a freeze. We know what's going to happen. If they have a house where a lot of people are moving in, or they have cast iron plumbing. I don't know a lot about plumbing. I knew nothing about cast iron plumbing before I started doing this, but I can almost say there's going to be an issue there. So really the product of what we do is basically the experience that we have with it. And that's one of the reasons why, I've given away houses, leads to people that buy or sell houses for clients that are no longer mine. And they say, well, do you want, a referral fee, or do you want to help me sell this? I'm like, no, I don't do that. I'm giving that to you. You're going to do a great job with it. My focus is on this, because the more of this I chew up and get, the better I become at it. And that's another reason why I don't do in-house maintenance. I have some really good maintenance providers. We use them, but I get to still be the customer. I'm not running guys out in the garage. I think the key to doing something really well is just really being focused on it. And that's hard in the beginning because the business doesn't always come. But, I want to be a resource. I want to be useful. I also want to do well myself. And that's why I just kind of, basically pay attention to the patterns. They're not going to lie to you.
And in a quick nutshell here, to answer this last part of Eston's last question, is how do you retain tenants? What is your secret sauce, right? In a quick answer, what is it? Communication.
I answer my phone.
Nice.
Absolutely.
Great.
Same thing, when you're listing and looking for someone in a listing, it's the same thing. I know that's kind of outdated, but trust me, they understand. When I first did this, and this is going to sound weird to you, every one of my tenants actually has my cell number, not my cell number for people that work for me. They have mine. And I used to own 2 fast food restaurants. One of them was 24 hours. I got calls all the time. People told me when I did this, I get calls all the time. I've had my phone on here. You haven't heard it ring. So don't be afraid to be a good communicator. But that also means don't be afraid to deliver a tough message, because I think people respect responsiveness. If you're responsive, it may not always be the good news. The thing that people really dislike is when they have a problem and you're not answering the phone.
Perfect. Hector Arteaga asked, do you manage multifamily or just residential?
So I'll go up to 4. And I get that question a lot about multifamily. And the reason I don't, and I've even gone to events and ask people questions, it's very hard economically for us to make money on small multifamily. That's things under, 50 or 60. And if it goes over that, we're not cut out to do it. So I always tell people, if you're doing something like that, that's going to be very profitable for you, but it's going to be a labor of love. You're probably going to have to do a lot of your own stuff. Mm-hmm. If you do, you're going to look for a very specialized company. And even if I did charge the price, am I going to be over there to kind of turn rooms and do all that kind of, it's difficult. So to answer your question, I don't. And unfortunately, if I had someone to refer you to, I would. I just do not, to be quite honest with you. So if you find anybody, let me know, because I get that question a lot. I'd like to be able to throw that business to someone who does that work.
Okay, perfect. And last question here, and it's actually from Gabriel Kwok. He's one of our members that is working on the new build co-housing units that we're building. Troy, you're going to get to meet Gabe. Gabe, go ahead and meet Troy. He's going to be finishing his first unit here real soon. I think we're about a month out. And Gabe, I know this is business right now, I'll reply to the email you sent me, but I checked with the team. It's okay to go ahead and pay draw number 4 because the work has been done. Maria is out of the country, and she told me in a text just a second ago, make sure to let Gabriel know that. So we're good to go for draw number 4. And Gabe wanted to ask, do you work with other RPM offices, and will you recommend them? Or who can you recommend?
So the answer to that really locally is I don't. And it's not because the way we're set up, our franchise is owned by a company called Neighborly. They own a lot of like Mr. Handyman, and those guys all have restrictions. We don't. So basically, in effect, I'm competing with the other real property management systems. And I will tell you that this is going to be more of your choice if you go with another one in another area. Is basically it's more about the size of the business as opposed to the name on the sign. If you're looking for someone, a dedicated property manager, no matter where it is, you want someone that's focusing on that. If they got 15,000 doors and have their hands in all sorts of different things from construction to owner finance to stuff like that, I would say stay away, just because, I just, my feelings on that. But if it's somebody that you want to give a chance to, it's ultimately my message is don't pay attention to the sign, get to meet the person. Understand that if it's the salesperson and you hit it off, you still want to meet the person that's going to handle your account, because that's really what's important. And that's my advice. I will say that they do have a system. It's dedicated. It is pretty good, but I don't want to just recommend a logo to you, because, I want you to do your due diligence when you're out there looking.
Perfect. So we got these last two questions. Carrie asked, as an owner, how do you verify the PM is serving my tenant's needs?
As the owner. So what's the sign on that? Well, for one, you're going to be able to see if they're out there doing the visits. For one, you're getting reports and you're getting photographs. So they're at least out there showing their face. I think ultimately you got to sometimes ask the tough questions, and it may not be a bad idea. Here's an idea I just thought of, is basically you're getting copies of the lease and everything else. Let's say that you have a tenant that's been there a while and they decide not to renew, and it could be because they're moving or something else. I mean, don't be afraid. Once they're not under contract anymore, pick up that phone and say, hey, just kind of wondering, how did my property manager do, or what did you think? And do a look. We used to call that in accounting, we do a look back. So, do a look back. If you're churning through people all the time, then, there might be an issue there.
Exactly.
So that would be my advice.
It reminds me of my best friend was, how come you're going through girlfriends so much? And he would always say it was the girls. No, we figured out later on the guy was in that job. But still a great friend.
Go back to the patterns, right? You do your look
Right.
back and say, okay, that one was this because I don't like that. You start to see.
Right. Okay, last question here. Chris asks, what software do you use?
So we are still, because Real Property Management recommended it, and I have just really good at using it. I still like AppFolio, but obviously, really it's a personal preference kind of thing. So I can't really say that versus anything else. I can tell you, with my accounting background, I've been able to sort and do things I need to do. I like the fact that I get to retain everything, and it's kind of time stamped. So if Diego's my owner and I want to send him a report, or if he's a tenant, if I ever have to go to court, I can screenshot it and say, no, wait a minute, we did this on this day and that. So whatever you're looking for, just make sure it's got a lot of storage and a lot of documentation. I can even send texts that are saved. And that's a huge thing too. I mean, I know you can do that within your phone and everything else, but all my emails, all my text, everything is saved in there. So there's never any kind of, even from my own memory, going back and looking at when we did things. So.
Okay, awesome. Guys, if you want to get in contact with Troy, his information is right there. Feel free to take a screenshot of it. This is also going to be posted in our social media at StratiVentures in the YouTube channel, and also we'll be sending some information out on Instagram. We want to thank a lot of our SVI partners and affiliates. Troy, you're there. Only property management company we work, right? Only property management company we work with, guys. We highly recommend giving them a call. And if those of you that are new and want to get to know us a little bit better, visit our landing page, investorrealestatetraining.com, for free one-on-ones. You can call us at the 800 number you see there. Also email us at info@strativentures.com. But you can also visit our landing page. And by the way, if you wanted to know everything that SVI does, I put up a video that the girls made me make to better make what is it that SVI does. I'm proud of it, right? it's a good video. And for all the realtors that are out there, we are holding our free Realtor Advantage trainings, guys. They happen once a month. I think, Troy, you went to one of our training events.
I learned a lot. It was great. And I've been recommending it to everybody that is a realtor, because a lot of times they just don't, that's not their focus, is investing. And it was a good refresher for me too. Great event.
Yeah, and it's free. Just go to the landing page, go to events, you'll see that. And we actually teamed up with one of the nation's I would guess you want to call it professionals of how to work with investors coming directly from a top producing real estate agent nationally. Winston Weitz is now becoming a good, I would say, good partner, good friend of SVI. We're so happy to bring him on because, as you always know, minimizing risk is staying in your lane. And so the SVI in mitigating risk, investing, flipping, presenting a better quality investor member to partners is now we have the realtor side where they're going to be going through the training process of working with our members even better. So all of you guys that are members, get ready. We're going to be producing some better realtors. And those of you guys that want to become members of SVI, we strongly recommend you do that because we're gaining some good traction nationally. And we look forward to bringing on better partners for each component. We found the property management one. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. Please scan the QR code there. Follow us on all the social media platforms. And last words there, Troy, I really want to thank you. The staff always thanks you for all your time and professionalism. And our
It's
members
always a good time,
always,
man. I always look forward to it.
Yep. So what can you tell us? Oh, by the way, happy Valentine's Day. And everybody, I don't want to keep you from your loved ones. But thanks for making the effort. So have a great evening, everybody.
I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.